Shelly Miscavige. She has not appeared in public since 2005.
Where's Shelly and what happened?
Where is Shelly?
We're looking at like 17 years of a person just missing.
Shelly Miscavige was given into the sole care of L. Ron Hubbard by her parents when she was 12.
This is where Shelly is believed to be being held captive.
Do you believe that Shelly Miscavige is a threat today?
Oh,
Absolutely.
she's seen it all. She's been by his side the whole time.
Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Claire Headley, and this is my next episode of Where is Shelly Miscavige, in which I have been delving deep into the life of Shelly Miscavige by interviewing those who actually know her personally and have worked with her, and will continue to shine a light on this topic since Shelly has not been seen in public for now 18 years. My guest for today is the amazing Hana Eltringham Whitfield. Welcome back, Hana.
Hi, Claire. It's good to be back with you.
Yes. So I know we are going to get back to your story, but for today's episode, I appreciate that you're willing to talk with me about your personal experiences with Shelly, as well as her sister Clarisse, and then in later years, her mother, Flo Barnett.
Yes.
So where would you like to start? Probably just let's talk about how you first met Clarisse and Shelly.
Yeah, let's do that. That was on the ship, and then we can lead into their mother, Flo, later on. And I have to say, Shelly came on later. She came on a few years later, but I was very impressed with the messengers. They were dressed all in white, little white uniforms, and they were all courteous, respectful, very well behaved. They never did anything I know of that they weren't supposed to do.
And they were all minors?
As far as I know, they were all minors. I don't know who was the appointed guardian for Clarisse, for example. I have no idea. But Hubbard had written a flag order that specified they were to come, those people coming on board without parents had to have guardians on the ship.
Yes.
So clearly Clarisse had a guardian. I don't know if it was Kimmer or maybe Kimmer Douglas, Duncan Dunleavy or somebody else, but she had her guardian.
Yes.
But she was wonderful. She rarely came to me with a message from Hubbard. Usually it was Janice Gillam or Terry Gillam who came to me. But I was I walked through the ship frequently and was always seeing Clarisse somewhere or another. And then when Shelly came on board about 3 years later, I noticed the same about Shelly. She was very quiet, almost, I thought, withdrawn.
Yes.
Didn't smile often, but very prompt, very polite, respectful. And even if the girls were sitting outside LRH's office, they had little chairs on which they sat to wait for him to call them. The girls would be completely well behaved. I mean, they were never throwing things and giggling and stuff like that. It just didn't happen. So I was impressed with them, and more impressed with the messengers than I actually was with some of the ship's crew.
Interesting.
Ship's crew. And again, I didn't have that much to do with them because I was usually approached by other messengers. But I've never forgotten those girls and others who acted as messengers. You know, so they made an impression.
Yeah. Was it surprising to you how young they were?
It was.
Okay.
And I was surprised, actually, that mothers and fathers would let their children come onto a ship that was registered in foreign countries
Yes.
that where they had maybe a guardian, but the guardian was a full-time crew member as well,
Right.
who didn't have that much time to run around and care for the child that they were guarding.
Right. And it's not that the minors were on the same schedule as the adults, I'm presuming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were treated like adults. They had to behave like adults. Yes.
And there was no schooling, no education, obviously.
Oh, no, not at that time.
Yeah.
I think that came in maybe a bit later on, but no, there was no requirement that they finish their GEDs or, whatever. No, there was no requirement.
Yeah.
Hubbard actually had written a flag order sometime in that time period saying that children on board must be treated as adults. They must be given the respect of adults and treated as adults. And I thought, that's a very steep learning curve.
Right.
They're completely denied everything that normal children receive in those years before they turn 18 or 21.
Yes.
And, so these kids were exceptional.
Wow. Interesting. And so what was this time period in which you had interactions with Shelly and Clarisse, for example? So I think you said starting in 1970. So when did this last until?
It lasted until we came ashore, which would have been in 1975.
Okay.
So
and that was when originally to Daytona?
Yes, first to
Okay.
Daytona.
Yeah.
And we had some messengers around in Daytona. Hubbard was living in another location and had his messengers with him. And occasionally a messenger would come to where we were in the Neptune Hotel, running the flag service organization, which was delivering all the auditing and training to people who came to flag. So came to the flagship. So occasionally the messenger would run up with Tony Dunleavy was our commanding officer, and they'd run up to him, or to Gwen North, the chief officer, or to me, the supercargo. So occasionally one or another of the messengers came up. I remember seeing Clarisse and Shelly around, more so Clarisse than Shelly.
Yeah.
And again, more so Janice and Terry.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what were your impressions of Clarisse? So Clarisse is, of course, Shelly's older sister. She's 2 years older. What were your impressions of her in her demeanor?
She was maybe not quite as reserved and timid as Shelly was. She was a little more outgoing, but she was also a little sterner.
Okay.
She was a little, what's the best way to describe it? Whereas Janice and Terry would sometimes come up and they'd be smiling and they'd be joking between the two of them or whatever as they delivered a message, Clarisse was always very prompt, very much on the ball, delivered the message and waited quietly, her face expressionless, she'd just be right on it. So she very focused.
Yeah, and when they would deliver a message to you from Hubbard, were you required to respond verbally, or you were required to type or write something?
No, we just responded verbally. That's all the response we had. I don't know whether anybody else wrote the message down or our response, but any time a messenger came up to me in those years, up to the time we went ashore, the messenger came with a verbal message. I responded verbally, and the messenger left.
Okay, interesting. And what were the types, can you think of some examples? I'm just curious, what types of messages was Hubbard sending you?
Let's see. Oh my goodness, there were so many.
Yes, just an example. I was just curious.
For example, in Daytona, your GI is lagging. Get
your
on the ball.
Gross income.
Gross income. Your gross income statistic, production statistic for the week is lagging. It's down. Get on the ball and get it up.
Interesting.
That could be one of them. And I'd go, oh, shit, okay. I'd jump into gear, and I always showed it to Tony, my superior. Well, actually, that implies that I had a written message. Well, some written messages did come down, but the verbal, I always went to Tony Dunleavy and let him know what message I had received as well.
Okay.
Another message I received was, Hannah, you are going to need more auditors. You're going to need more auditors, which we were already dealing with. We needed more immediately. I don't remember what else there was to the message.
Okay.
Another message was something like, your handling of AOs. This would have been when I was, let's see, I'm trying not to get my things mixed up here.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, in AVU, your handling of AO St. Hill, DK, Denmark, the advanced organization, and St. Hill in Denmark was well done. Some of those were nice. I treasured those because there weren't that many of those.
Okay. What was AVU?
Authority and Verification Unit.
Okay, which was later moved to Religious Technology Center. That was the early beginnings.
That was the beginning of it, in which we became on the ship responsible for making sure that every order that left the ship to go to a Scientology organization or satellite of some kind was on policy, complied with all LRH policy and all his issued orders. So,
interesting. That's a challenge since a lot of the policies contradict each other.
Right. Huge challenge. I even found myself going down to Mimeo at times, the huge department down below in one of the holds. And Mimeo was where all LRH's orders were copied and distributed. And I had to go to the files, which held excess copies, and hunt for his previous issued technical bulletins to see how they compared with a new one that was being proposed in the present.
Wow.
So, to be sure that it was correct.
Yeah. So paper days, no internet searching, computers, all of that back then.
It was all hard footwork and handwork and brain work. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. And did you have any other interactions with Shelly during those years that you remember particularly?
Maybe a few.
Okay.
I think she actually, this was when I was before AVU. I don't remember her so much when we were in AVU later on, but I remember earlier. She came around once with Janice on a messenger run. I don't remember what it had to do with. It had to do with the engine room.
Okay.
And why it came to me, I think, was because of personnel. And LRH wanted, if I remember correctly, LRH wanted to know why somebody had been removed from the engine room. And I knew nothing about it. I mean, I said, I'll find out for you, sir. And I got on my feet and I raced down to find out from the chief engineer what had happened, where the person had gone and traced it back to some illegal move that had been done by someone else, either in that division, the engineering division on board, or even another division. But I found all the information and sent it up to LRH.
Okay. And of course, by illegal, you don't mean literally illegal, but against Hubbard's policy, right?
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I just want to make sure we're clear for anyone, I mean, we can get deep in the weeds on language real quick, as you very well know.
Yes. Illegal only as far as Hubbard's policies on board. For example, somebody may have been posted given a job in the engine room to maintain the generators. There were 4 of them on the Apollo, on the Royal Scotsman. And so that could have been considered at one point, I think it was, a full-time job. Every time a generator went offline, it was given a maintenance, complete maintenance. Everything was cleaned, rescheduled, and so forth. And if somebody moved illegally that person off that maintenance line, it would have been illegal per Hubbard policies. So that was how I meant it.
Yes, no, absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Awesome. And so one other question.
Yes.
So there were all these minor messengers, and I understand they had guardians aboard the ship. Were they ever afforded the opportunity to visit their actual families?
As far as I know, no, they weren't. Not often, Claire.
Yeah.
But none of us were. It was, and for them as well, even though they had privileged positions as LRH messengers, and they were very privileged positions, everybody had to completely respect them, give them no flack, no resistance, be courteous to them, and so forth. I don't remember.
Interesting.
I don't remember them being gone on leaves of absence. Besides, one had to petition for a leave of absence with a very good reason.
Wow.
And it had to go all the way from wherever it originated in, the lower portions of the ship, all the way up through various senior positions, up to maybe myself as CS1 or one of the other aides, or even to LRH for permission to leave for a certain length of time.
Wow. So for a messenger, they probably most likely would absolutely have to have approval from Hubbard, you think?
Absolutely, yeah. Because they'd be off the messenger roster, and they would have to be replaced so that roster position was not left vacant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So not even for Christmas or, the things that people would normally think, well, of course you spend Thanksgiving, Christmas with your family. None of that.
No, the Sea Org purpose took precedence over anything else, including family ashore, including commitments ashore, including birthdays, that took precedence. And we knew that when we signed the Sea Org contract, and I presume that most anybody who signed the Sea Org contract knew that as well.
Yeah.
And,
though it's hard, I think it's hard for example, Shelly was 12 when she joined the Sea Organization. It's hard, I think, for any 12-year-old to envision what that really means. I mean, they're not even adult. Their brain's not even fully formed, of course.
Right. I think that's why, Claire, I'm putting myself back into the mindset of those young people. And that's why they looked so startled when they were first on the ship and introduced to being messengers, because they did. As time went by, they became more settled, but to begin with, they looked sort of startled with everything. It took time for them to get into it.
And there was probably a mystical aspect, like, oh, we're going to the ship to be with the founder of Scientology, but as a minor, the reality of that far away from your family. Were their families even allowed to know where they were physically?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea. I think Hubbard may have made an exception with his messengers, but I don't know. I never went into it with any of them. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll make a note of that, and I'm doing another follow-up episode with Janice. I'll make sure to ask her about that
Wonderful.
too.
Yes, she will know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And did you have any other thoughts or impressions from those years of either Shelly or her sister Clarisse? Any other thoughts or experiences you'd like to share?
Let me see.
And just for context too, so according to my notes and talking with Janice and so forth, I have that Shelly would have come on board the Apollo in 1973 when she
Right.
was 12 years old.
Right.
And so you were mentioning that 1975 is when you went ashore. So you knew of Shelly for that
Right.
almost
For at
2
least
years.
2.5 to 3 years. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. I don't know why. Maybe because of the position I was in, Janice and Terry came to me more than the other messengers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was on purpose or not. I don't believe I spoke to Clarisse more than I spoke to Shelly that I can remember. And once or twice I remember even joking with Clarisse about something and we were laughing. Something about cleaning up the dorms, the crew that were the workmen of the ship. They slept in dorms below deck, and sometimes the messengers were sent to inspect the dorms and to make sure that the dorm occupants cleaned them up, because often they were left just in a mess.
Yes.
And I remember Clarisse one time chuckling with me. She said, "Oh God, it was terrible. Even the smell down there is, we have to disinfect and the whole
wow.
thing." And once Shelly was with her, and we all laughed about it. We joked and laughed about it, but not much. I don't remember much more than that.
Okay. And were there ever any social activities where like all the people, including the messengers, hung out or did whatever you do on a ship?
Yes, especially Christmas celebrations and New Year's. The guardrails came down, and the messengers very often mixed with some of the deckhands and the other crew, and they'd have parties, sort of smaller parties around the large party in the main dining room where the big festivities went on for Christmas and New Year's.
Okay.
And we would sort of watch them, that they weren't drinking too much and, this kind of thing. But they were always well behaved, always. I think Mary Sue had to put her foot down a few times, but it was never anything. It was never anything too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so that was, and so you said that when you went ashore, you didn't have much more interactions with Shelly specifically?
No, not really. Except I mentioned I saw her at the Neptune Hotel where we had the flag service organization temporarily set up to deliver training and auditing.
Yes.
And I saw Shelly. She came around a few times with LRH. Clarisse was there. Terry and Janice were there, and David. I forget David's last name. David, another messenger. And they were all around LRH and sort of peering around and looking. I didn't know if Hubbard had asked them to snoop, to look around and check on this and check on that, make sure this was done or that was done. I got the idea that he had, but I didn't say anything. And because he came around from time to time and walked through the organization with us and so on.
And sorry, just for anyone listening, the David was very definitely not David Miscavige.
No,
Yes.
no.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know that. I'm just stating the so
Well
it's
done.
expressed between us.
Well done for catching that, Claire. Yes, no, it wasn't David Miscavige. It was a young, quite sweet guy, dark-haired, good-looking, very happy young man. He was, I don't know, early teens, 11, 12, early teens, and he was a messenger. Took
Okay.
his job very seriously.
All right. Any other experiences with Shelly after coming ashore that you would like to share?
No, I don't think I had any at all. When we moved from the Neptune to Clearwater, The messengers remained with LRH. They were again in another location in Clearwater, and we didn't see them often.
Okay.
Tony Dunleavy and Gwen North and I, still the executives in the Flag Service Organization, moved into the Fort Harrison building.
Okay.
And worked there. And Hubbard would come occasionally with several messengers, but sometimes he came into our organization. Usually it was into other organizations in the area of our organizations, like the Flag Ship Organization, still called the Flag Ship Organization, but it looked after the hotel, the cleanliness, the meals, the birthing spaces of all the people who were there. So it was more like a household organization. He more often went to see them, and also the Guardian's office, which was located elsewhere in Clearwater.
Okay. Awesome. And then, so now we're going to fast forward. So what year did you manage to get out of all this mess?
Oh, goodness. 1982, finally. Okay. I went to the RPF in 1978 or 78, because I had a rock slam, which in Scientology means I had sinned very badly. I did something evil against someone.
Yes, and for anyone listening that doesn't know what a rock slam is, because that sounds alarming, that of course you're referring to as the phenomena on the E-meter, the lie detector in Scientology, where the needle slashes back and forth erratically and indicates that the person has evil purposes against Scientology. That's fair to say?
Right. Absolutely perfectly. And that rapid movement of the needle is so fast that I can't follow it. And that is, there's more definition to it, but there's no need for us to go into it.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a conversation for another day. And of course, we'll cover the rest of your story. We're just fast forwarding for this episode, because after you were no longer in Scientology, it's my understanding, and I'd love to hear the story of this, that you knew and had interactions with Flo Barnett, who is, of course, was Shelly's mother.
Shelly's mother, Clarisse's mother, that's correct.
Okay.
I never met Flo on the ship. I don't believe I knew about her on the ship.
Yeah, that makes sense, because she was in LA.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, she was never on the ship.
No, I don't ever remember her being there. But after I got out of Scientology, which was in March of 1982, I stayed in Los Angeles for a few years, met my husband in 1984. We got married in December of 85. And after that, we set up a little auditing business, because so many people were leaving Scientology and wanting to get more auditing and training.
Okay.
They still believed in Hubbard's technology.
Okay.
And because so many were coming out, existing auditors who had already left couldn't cope. So Jerry and I said, okay, let's start helping some of these people. And we started doing so, and pretty soon we were auditing and training from morning until night. We were very busy. And it was in must have been towards the end of 1985, 84, somewhere in there, 83, somewhere in that period. I don't have it down exactly.
Okay.
That I remember, that I received a call one day from Flo out of the blue. And she said, she was speaking in a very rapid voice. And I immediately knew she was in trouble. She said, look, I need auditing. I need it urgently. And she broke down in tears. And she said that David Mayo can't help me. David Mayo had already set up his little organization up in Santa Barbara to help people who left Scientology. to help
Okay.
them.
And sorry, just to fill in for context. So David Mayo used to be one of the top
Auditors.
top executives in Scientology, and he
Yes.
even actually wrote some of the counseling procedures.
Right, the upper level counseling
Yes.
procedures.
Yeah, and isn't it true that he also extensively audited Hubbard himself?
He did, and in his training, David was trained by LRH to become one of the best auditors.
Okay, and so he had now left and had opened a practice where people could still get Scientology counseling and training, but
Right.
outside of the
Outside of-
organization of Scientology.
Right.
Yeah, and just a side comment, it's kind of interesting to me that seems to be a common theme, at least in Scientology, where a first step for somebody is to leave the organization, but they still want to subscribe or believe in the beliefs or use the counseling or the training.
The techniques, the auditing techniques that Hubbard developed. They wanted that. They'd had success with it in Scientology, and they wanted more.
Okay.
They did.
That was never my path. But I've just seen it a lot where, but it always seems to be just a first stepping stone, at least again in my experience. I'm curious to get your comment,
Claire,
to then shed it completely.
That wasn't my experience either. I left
Okay.
the technical, but I left the technical and the management policy. I left everything. But then when we saw how many people, I did not want to do anything more with auditing, but when we saw how many people wanted the auditing, we said, we've got to help. And I went, okay. And I put on my auditor persona again, and I went at it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So you were telling me about this first, and was this the first time you had personally talked with Flo?
Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
know her. I didn't know her before.
Okay.
She came across to me as very anxious, very frightened, very scared of what was happening with her. And the little bits she gave me in the phone call told me that she had experienced something very good early on in Scientology,
Okay.
and she had no one had ever been able to tell her what that was. And she had received a lot of help around it and wanted to have it acknowledged that she had received some sort of state of awareness that she wanted to have acknowledged. It was almost like somebody, let's say in the real world, a swimmer who swims in a competition and comes out as having broken the world record. They stand up and they're acknowledged and they're acclaimed for their ability, and they're happy with that. But in Scientology, there were all sorts of states Hubbard mentioned one could attain. And you could state what it was and be acknowledged for it and even receive a certificate for it. But in Flo's case, she said nobody would acknowledge what she said she had achieved. Nobody would do anything. I said, well, Claire, I'm sorry, Flo.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I can't promise you that I will be able to give you what you want, but we can certainly try. Let's try.
Okay. And what was the fear that she was talking about?
She felt that she was going crazy.
Okay.
She felt she was drowning. This would be psychologically, mentally, maybe emotion. There had to be emotions. She didn't mention emotionally, but there were emotions flooding through what she was saying.
Okay.
That the spirits of people who had died long ago she was still involved in them, and they were overwhelming her. She couldn't get rid of them, and she had at one point, and they were coming back after her, and she couldn't get rid of them, and she needed help desperately. She was panicked.
Oh boy.
That was sort of the gist of it.
Okay. And do you know how far how far she'd gotten in terms of the Scientology levels?
Yes, she'd gone to what was the top at the time, which was OT7.
Wow. Okay.
She'd gone all the way through, and I was blown away that she had gone through apparently well enough for her to be happy with her completion at each level.
Yeah.
And yet at the end, she was so distraught. I scheduled her for one session, and she phoned and couldn't attend. And then she phoned again before the second session, and she said, Hannah, I'm desperate. I have to have some help. I said, Flo, can you come in today? She said, no, I can't. I've got no transport. I'm waiting for my car to get back. Somebody's got my car. And she was crying. She was just crying. And I thought, maybe I can get to her. But I don't remember what was going on. I couldn't get to her.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear from her again. Jerry and I talked about it. I even talked to to Judy Theory, who I used to consult with. She was a Class 12 auditor. She was living up the coast from me in Santa Barbara, and I used to consult with her. She was one of the few Class 12s who I knew where she was, and we had a good connection, and I would often talk to her about this person's auditing or that. Could I improve this? Could I do something better here? She was wonderful. And I even talked to Judy Theory. We got together over it, and she agreed with how I was going to approach Flo, with what we were going to do together.
Mm-hmm.
But then came that last phone call from Flo, and she was panicked, and I could not think of a way to get her. And then a day or two later, we heard, I don't remember how I heard.
Yeah, and sorry, we have to be careful what words we use on this platform. Okay, just making sure you know that because I know what's coming, but go ahead.
Yeah, we heard that she had passed, and that somebody, I think one of her daughters or a friend had found her.
Oh dear.
And I was given all the details of it, and I was terribly distraught.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then, and then, you know, other people were calling and phoning, and we were sharing information, and then came the news. It got somehow into the news, and the story of what happened with Flo got changed and turned around, and it apparently was misrepresented in the newspapers, and it was, I don't know how much I can go into, Claire.
Yeah. Well, so in the final, I guess in the coroner's report, it was ruled that she had unalived herself. We'll just put it that way. But
Right.
the circumstances surrounding it were very, very suspicious.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And yet Flo had mentioned, and again, I don't know if I should even go into this, she had mentioned when she called in her various talks that she felt like doing away with her own life, that it might be better.
I see.
She went and she wasn't giving people all this trouble, because it was like a lot of trouble, and it might be easier for her to end her life and then handle whatever or resolve whatever she wanted to without, because she believed Hubbard's beliefs that once this body is gone, we are a spirit that is aware and cognizant and can communicate, and she could resolve her issues in that way.
Oh, such a tragedy.
But she's also said to me, but Hannah, I don't want to do it. I need to fix it here. Yes, I can do that, but I'd rather fix it here. And that was when I said, well, Flo, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
Let's see, because I'm not tied down completely to doing things the way the church did.
Right. And so, and again, for context, at this point, it's my understanding that Shelly, Flo's daughter, was already married to David Miscavige.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was not yet the head person in charge. That was still 5 or so years off. But nonetheless, they were both senior executives. Is that correct from your recollection?
That's correct. And Flo talked about it. Thank you for bringing it up and brought the memory back. And Flo mentioned that Shelly, her daughter, was very distraught with Flo and what Flo was doing, and that Flo wasn't following orders from the church on how to resolve what was going on with her.
Yeah.
And Flo told me, but Hannah, I've tried and it didn't work. Every time I tried, it didn't work. Every time somebody from the church tried, it didn't work. That's why I'm coming outside the church. And then she said, but then Shelly gets mad at me because it's going to affect her husband, David's position in the church. I can't be connected to David if you're outside the church and you're declared suppressive. And she said, and she was caught in this turmoil between trying to please her daughter and spare her daughter from being in bad with the head of the Church of Scientology.
Yes.
And losing her children, and then or herself being declared and losing her children. It was a terrible, that was part of the dilemma that was going on. Apart from the other thing which Flo wanted to mention, which was this thing to do with herself, the state of awareness that she felt she had reached.
I see.
It was a mess.
Yeah, and of course by that time Shelly was in her early 20s. Did you ever hear, I'm curious, I've read somewhere that at one point Shelly had actually offered to divorce David Miscavige because of this situation with Flo. What recollections do you have about that piece?
Flo mentioned that as well as part of the. Flo knew about it, and she said that her daughter had offered to do this, and I don't remember what Flo's. It was everything clashed with everything that Flo was saying. And Flo, I think she said something along the lines of, I can't live with a daughter who's given up that position in Scientology. She considered that an overt of magnitude. She said that would be a sin far worse than me leaving Scientology.
Wow.
She couldn't see it. She couldn't do it.
Wow. And of course,
keep remembering things.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. I appreciate it. And it's to me, it's such a tragedy that it's so baked into Scientology that if somebody leaves then and seeks help elsewhere, then the family members remaining are essentially now labeled as a potential source of trouble, and they have to go through all different handlings. Even though just because, like in the case of Shelly, that must have been the case, because that's what Hubbard policies and the processes and counseling, that's what's built in, right?
Yes, including as a final resolution, disconnecting from loved ones.
Yes,
and it was just, and yet. Flo said that she couldn't do that to her daughter.
Right.
She couldn't have her daughter divorce her husband for her. She couldn't see that. She couldn't go through with that. And she also didn't.
Nor should she have had to.
No, she have had.
I mean, of course, that's presuming that the policies of Scientology aren't what they are.
Yes.
But that's just a terrible choice.
It's the quicksands that people are put into, where, even if you put another foot down to help yourself out of the bog, that one sinks.
Yeah.
And then you can manage to get one foot up and you try to get out and that foot sinks. There's no way out of the mess.
Yeah, that's a great example. Another example I often use is like getting caught in the spider's web. And
Right.
the more you struggle to try and get out, the tighter.
The more you're twisted in it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It was shocking.
So is it fair to say from your experience, just setting aside the agreeably the very suspicious circumstances of those events regarding Flo, the tragedy that she was suffering through was 100% Scientology?
No doubt in my mind.
Okay.
Absolutely no doubt, because Flo mentioned as the source of the problem, the source of the difficulty she was experiencing, being Hubbard's OT3, OT4, 5, 6, 7 levels. Those levels in, I don't even want to go into it particularly, that mentioned having other invisible spirits do things to you that you don't want done to yourself. Being at the effect of other invisible spirits. And she felt she was that way, and that came from Hubbard's techniques.
Right.
So it was totally tied in, and the awareness that she wanted to have acknowledged, which was also part of Hubbard's techniques. It all came from that.
Yeah.
No doubt in my mind. And everything, including the way she felt, the way she wanted to end it, if she had, also came from that. It was all tied into it.
Yeah. Were you aware if she was also having any financial difficulties?
Oh, yes. She said that thank you again.
Yeah, no, you're good. That's why this was such an important conversation to me, because I just really, I don't know much about Flo. I don't think I've ever actually talked with somebody before who knew her personally. So anyway, thank you again.
She was a small woman. She was a live wire. She was very articulate, but in those talks I had with her, she didn't ramble, but she was frantic. She was right on topic, but she was frantic.
Interesting.
She had to have help now because it was overwhelming her. She couldn't do it anymore. That's the kind of thing. But back to her financial situation. When she first went to David Mayo's group in Santa Barbara, David couldn't take her on because she couldn't pay.
I see.
She didn't have the money. And she said, I asked around, I asked to borrow, but I couldn't go to my kids because Shelly was in Scientology. She said she couldn't have helped me. And I didn't have other resources.
Oh, boy.
So she said, Hannah, I thought, well, Jerry and I told her, look, Flo, don't worry about the money. Let's drop that. I mean, you just come over. Let's see what we can do. Just drop that issue completely. I mean, for God's sake, who, if you're frantic, would you say, no, you've got to give me, $50, $100, whatever it is,
Right.
And the person says, I can't, I don't have it. Oh, come on inside, pick up the cans.
Right. Yeah. And by this point, I mean, Flo had gotten into Scientology, I think, in 1965.
Same year I did. That's right. Yes.
So she'd been in Scientology almost 20 years.
Right.
And when she got in, she and her husband Barney had a successful business, a nice house, and it's my understanding they lost everything. Again, another facet of the tragedy of Scientology in this story. But yeah, I was curious of your conversations with Flo on that aspect.
Right. Didn't go much into it because of her current situation that she was panicking, but she did mention that coming into Scientology, they had done well. They were doing well.
Yeah.
They had all the money, and then it I don't think she mentioned much about how all their money went into Scientology. Basically, it's the same story that one heard over and over again from Scientologists. Everything we had was put into Scientology.
Right.
She said, and now we have nothing and we need help.
Yeah.
And David couldn't help her.
Yeah, and how sad is it? I mean, that she had no one to even ask, no one to go to. This was, to me anyway, from where I sit, it sounds like this was entirely brought on by these pressure points, completely revolving around her family, her daughter. Doesn't sound like Shelly treated her very well in this instance.
No, it didn't, and I was perturbed by that.
Mm-hmm.
But I said nothing to Flo. I wasn't going to add to what she already felt about it. I said nothing. I left it quiet.
Yeah, though I will comment again from my own personal experiences. There's no question in my mind that Shelly was under incredible pressure to fix this. Not only by David Miscavige, who was her husband, but also by, I'm sure, her executives who she was working with, maybe even Hubbard himself.
Yep.
I'm not sure where he was. I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but as given that Shelly had worked with him for a long time by that point, it would not surprise me one bit.
Right. Me neither.
Yeah.
It was Jerry and I were. We were sort of bowled over by what was happening. But Claire, at that time, we had a few other people we were helping him who were in the same situation as Flo.
Yeah.
And what made it even worse was that it was just the situation was like it was right here in front of us. The neglect, the Scientology training made Scientologists believe that if you didn't get the end result of a process or a technique, as Hubbard described the end result, and if nothing worked on it and you still didn't get it, and you worsened and you started to complain and you made trouble and so on, you were a suppressive person. You were bad. There was no way, no thorough way. Yes, there were ways to deal with it, but there was no way to make sure that, the real basic cause was found. And if it was found, it became the Scientologist's fault. Because Scientologists had done something similar to another in his past.
Yeah.
So the blame for what the Scientologist was going through was put back on the Scientologist.
Yes.
And that was the worst thing of all that we were dealing with.
Totally makes sense.
And with Flo, she was left with that. But Hannah, I'm the one who is causing this. I'm the one who is doing wrong here. I'm the one who is, and we kept trying to say, no, Flo.
Right.
No, Flo, please come. Please come.
Oh, what a tragedy.
It was too little too late.
Yeah.
It's too little too late. I wish he'd come to us earlier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. By the way, did you know Paulette Cohen?
Oh, very well.
Oh.
Paulette Fisher. Paulette, yeah.
Yeah, so she is somebody that really helped me.
Really?
Yeah, because having grown up, from birth to age 30.
Very dear friend.
Oh, that's amazing.
Still in touch.
Oh, that's awesome. No, she is a lovely person. We send her Christmas cards. But I met her, I was actually emailing with her, and she, for people listening, she was a long-term Scientologist, and I think definitely a member of the Sea organization, and she audited Hubbard as well, right?
Audited Hubbard as well.
Yeah.
Didn't last too long, but she did, yes.
Yeah, but she helped me come to grips with kind of my struggle of mentally what I was going through. I was obviously very fearful, And I couldn't understand, like, why was Mark able to just walk out and just be like, all right, good, I'm done. And it's not that I believed or anything. I was just so struggling mentally with all the labels and what does this mean? And that's what made me think of it when you were talking about that you blame yourself, like, oh, I just must be a bad person. And Paulette, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she just kind of very gently pointed out to me, did it ever occur to you that perhaps part of the struggle is because you're in this mental turmoil that was brought on by the fact that you had done the upper levels? Because I was in the middle of operating Thetan level 5.
Really?
Yeah. And she really just helped me with that. And it
fantastic,
because it is like mental gymnastics of an extreme nature, and no one's ever studied what impact that has on a person, right?
And I've likened it to a maze without an ending. And all along the way, there are barbed spears and wires and so on that are triggered to come out of the hedges to attack you if you put your foot wrong. And you never know if you're putting your foot wrong, and you're searching for the end, but there's no end.
Wow. Yeah.
It becomes a torture chamber. It actually becomes a torturous trail.
Yes.
And the more you try to resolve it with Scientology, the worse it gets.
Right.
Scientology can't resolve it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, on a final note, I have one last question for you.
Yes.
And then I will, of course, very much look forward to our next installment. I'm learning so much, and I'm so grateful for your time.
You're very welcome, Claire. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for reaching out. And I'm so glad to be able to do this.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So here's my last question for you.
Yeah.
If you could talk to Shelly today, what would you say?
Oh, wow. It would depend, of course, on what Shelly was doing at the time I was talking to her. If she was, refusing to talk to me completely, I would just become my gentlest self that I could. And I would probably say to her, Shelly, you asked why on earth, somebody called me to come and talk to you because there's nothing wrong with Scientology. And I'd just say to her, well, why would that someone have asked me to come to talk to you if there was nothing wrong with it?
Yeah.
Just very quietly, and maybe saying, all I'm asking for is just a moment of your time. I promise I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to try to change your mind. Nothing,
Yeah.
And just along that line, try to set up a teeny point of trust, just a tiny one that we could gradually expand on. And sometimes it goes easily and sometimes it doesn't. So you just have to work on it a bit more.
Yes.
Now, in the situation, if Shelly came to me and she was saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that somebody was going to ask you to talk to me or that I was going to run into you or something. Well, I said, these things happen. And of course, why did you think this was happening? I just want to find out what she's thinking.
Yeah.
And she might say something along the lines of, well, of course, it's got to go back to Scientology. But again, she's not resisting me, so I'd say to her, well, if that's what you're feeling, is there something more to it that you feel deserves to be addressed?
Mm-hmm.
I would try to get a niche, try to find an opening to get into. And if I couldn't find, if she gave me the opening, I would take it. If she couldn't give me an opening, then I would say, well, there are some, I feel, very interesting things that one could look at.
Yes.
And just open it that way. But be very laid back, friendly, confrontative.
Yeah.
Just be very laid back.
Yeah.
Because
Which takes down barriers versus putting them up.
absolutely, because any resistance, anything like that, raises up that barrier of no,
Yes.
I will not talk to you. And once you've got that raised, it's hard
Yeah.
to bring it back down again. It can
Yeah,
be
for a Scientologist, I kind of liken that to almost even a soundproof chamber. Like
yeah, right.
they just shut down and stop receiving input whatsoever, and you're almost at that point. If you run into that, you may as well be not even be a human, right? Is that your experience?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, exactly. Yes, early on when Jerry and I were working it out, how to approach a Scientologist, we got into it a few times, and in two of those we managed to get out of it, but it took a few days. It took a little bit of work to get out of it, and we can go into that later.
Yes, I'd love to.
Yeah. So, and there are various other ways. So, for example, those are two main ways I can think of how I would talk to Shelly.
Yeah.
And of course, if she was interested in talking to me, it's the roadway is open. You know, the communication is open. You can sort of bring it up and say, well, is there anything you're interested in?
Yes.
You know, is there anything you've noticed, for example? Because I noticed myself, but what about you? It might be something different that you're interested in. And some people come back and say, well, no, I'm really interested in what got you. And I say, oh, really? Okay, in that case, let's do such and such.
Yes.
But always very watchful, aware of and watchful for what the person is giving you, because you have to follow on that. Always try to follow on what the person is giving you, because then you're aligned with that person's mind. You're following that person.
Yeah. That makes
So
sense.
Shelly, if there's ever a chance, and who knows, there might be, I would love to talk to you. I would not hurt you. I would do everything in my power to make you feel unhurt if you were hurting, and to bring about a resolution for you where you are happy again.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful, Hannah. Thank you so very much for your time on this episode. And I love you. And we will schedule our next episode of your story, which is, we've just started unfolding at this point. So anyway.
Yeah. Love you too.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll talk soon. And until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, dear.